In the first line of the opening hymn we sang this morning, we sang these words, "Eternal Lord of love, behold your church." Our gospel reading from the Gospel of John tells us that when this Lord of love, Jesus, beheld what was going on in what would have been the equivalent of church in his time, the temple in Jerusalem, he was not very pleased with what he beheld. In fact, in today's gospel reading, we encounter a very angry Jesus. It's a time of Passover, and Jesus has walked into the court of the Gentiles, one of the outer courts of the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. He's enraged. He's furious. He appears to have lost all control. He's weaving a whip of cords around and shouting at the top of his lungs. He's driving out even the lambs that are there to be bought for the Passover meal, a feast to celebrate the compassion of God in delivering the people of Egypt, the people of Israel out of bondage in Egypt. It was necessary, according to their rules, that the lamb they used for Passover be certified by the temple priests as an unblemished lamb. They had to have this if they were going to celebrate. And some of them had walked dusty roads for miles to get there, to buy their Passover lamb. The temple was the only place you could be sure that you got a certified, unblemished lamb. So the demand was high. The supply was fixed. And those who sold the lambs could pretty much charge whatever they wanted. They treated the celebration of God's compassion, as revealed in the Exodus, as if it were a commodity to be bought and sold. Now, on that occasion, we also see Jesus turning over table after table, sending coins flying. And these weren't just any coins, they were special coins used by the people to make their offering in the temple. They had to have these particular coins. And the temple was a very special place. The temple was the place where they believed that God, the God of compassion who had led them out of Egypt, the God of compassion who had formed them as a people in the wilderness, the God of compassion who had given them 10 what they called words to live by on Mount Sinai, formed a covenant with them. They went to this temple and made their offerings, their monetary offerings, their thank offerings. And they couldn't make those with the Roman coins that they typically carried, because the Roman coins had the image of Caesar on them. And in their culture, the Caesar was considered to be a god. In fact, he was often called the Son of God. So in the temple, these coins were looked upon as if they were graven images of false gods, totally unfit to be used to make an offering. So they had to be changed. They had to be changed into coins that bore no such image. And it was a big business to do so, at a profit, of course. They treated the compassion of God, which was mediated to the people through the services at the temple, they treated it as if it were a commodity to be bought and sold. So all in all, Jesus became furious at the sight of such exploitation. Not just exploitation of God's people, but also exploitation of God's compassion. However, in doing what he did, he not only exposed the exploiters, he also messed up Passover for a whole lot of people. A whole lot of people who now couldn't buy their Passover lambs or get the coins to make their offering. Hard for us to imagine what that might be like. But for those present on that day, it would be as if right now someone came bursting through those back doors, ran down the aisles, ripped all of the prayer books and hymnals out of their racks, tore off their covers, ripped up their pages, and threw them up all over the building. It would be as if some out-of-control religious fanatic came in and yanked the beautiful silk hangings off the altar If they pulled down the big wooden cross from its place where we love it so much, on the front wall, if they pulled it down, took it and smashed it over the altar, sending all of the vessels, all of the wafers, all of the wine for communion scattering onto the floor. It would be as if this same person came in and chased each one of you out of your pew down here in the nave, even up in the balcony, made the choir leave. It would be as if every single one of us was driven out by this man into the front yard, the side yards, whatever way we could get out until the church was empty, and maybe, yes, there would be kids on the roof, like in the little children's. If you can imagine that scene, then you just might get a glimpse of the shock that everybody felt standing around that court of the Gentiles on that day. Jesus going crazy. His Jewish disciples trying to find some way to put this into context, having to look back through Scripture, come up with a psalm, zeal for your house will eat you up. The Jewish leaders who maybe weren't sure whether they should do something, but at least had the sense to ask, is there a sign? Is there something that will show us that you're supposed to be doing this? And what Jesus shouted to them was, stop making my Father's house a marketplace. Stop making my Father's house a marketplace. And I think this angry cry needs to be understood as a good bit more than just a caution about selling merchandise in the church, as it's sometimes reduced to when people try to talk about this message. Because it's not about whether you can sell tickets to the pancake supper in the narthex or whether you have to go to the parish hall to do it. It's about a good bit more than that. Jesus' cry needs to be heard as a fundamental challenge to the way we, you and I, to the way we behold church. A fundamental challenge to beholding church with a marketplace mentality. Now think about this with me for a moment. Think about the mentality of marketplace. Any marketplace. In a marketplace, there's both a seller and a buyer. The seller's job is to get the buyer to buy the particular product that he or she is selling. And that goal is achieved through a variety of methods, but all are intended to make that product irresistibly attractive. You want to attract the buyer with your product. You want to convince the buyer that this is exactly what that buyer needs to meet his or her needs. You want to convince the buyer that this is exactly what he or she needs to make him feel better and maybe even make him or her a better person in the process. Look at the commercials on TV. You can achieve all of that if you just buy a certain kind of deodorant. The marketplace seller is geared to make you want and need a product that they think you want and need. The smart buyer in the marketplace, who may be overwhelmed with the quantity of products all making equal claims, the smart buyer carefully examines all the possibilities to choose the product that promises best to do what he or she wants the product to do. Oh yeah, one thing more. The buyer typically wants to obtain the product with as little cost as possible. Doesn't want to spend a lot of time finding it, doesn't want to spend a lot of money getting it. The object is to obtain exactly what you need with as little cost possible and with the most assurance that this product really will do what it promises. That's just standard operating practice for the marketplace. In fact, it's the wisdom of the marketplace. So no wonder we quite often fall into the temptation of beholding the church through the same kind of marketplace wisdom. As a church, it's tempting to behold our mission as one of selling our product by convincing potential buyers that what we're selling is exactly what they're looking for. That if they'll just come here and try it out, all their needs will be met. They will feel better. And maybe in the process they'll become a better person. And it's tempting as a human being to behold ourselves as buyers, judging every church experience based on how well it achieves the results that we desire for ourselves and for others. But this market-based way of beholding the church is different from the way that the Lord of love beholds the church. And all we have to do is look back at stories like the Exodus or at stories like the crucifixion to see that. Because nobody would think that wandering around in the wilderness for 40 years is a great religious experience. And nobody would think that walking to a hill outside of Jerusalem and watching your leader be crucified and having to run for your lives is a great religious experience. God's way of beholding the church is different from the market-based mentality that we are always tempted to approach church with. Well, when I was writing this sermon, I got stuck here, right there, having said that. Because I knew that the next step had to be to say, well, if that's not the way you're supposed to behold the church, then what is it? And I found out that everything I wrote and erased on my computer, by the end of the time I had written it, it sounded just like a great market-based mentality. That it was so entrenched in me that even trying to explain or to say or to think about what it might look like for God to behold the church, expect us to behold it in a way different from a market-based mentality, I couldn't even do it. So I did what I always do when I get stuck in a sermon. I came over here, I sat back there in that corner, in that rocking chair, and I asked God to help me. I asked this question, God, what do you behold when you behold the church? And I waited, and I looked, and I listened, and a strange thought came to mind, but it was so strange I dismissed it. It was words that had come to mind earlier in the week in a whole different setting, having lunch with a friend, and I thought, well, that's weird. Why am I thinking about that? That couldn't possibly be it. So I asked again, and I waited some more, and I watched these ceiling fans go round and round for a while, and the same thought came back, same words, but it seemed like such an odd thought to be thinking. I dismissed it again. Instead, I stared at the big Celtic cross on the wall as if I stared at it long enough maybe it would say something to me. And I thought about what I had said earlier in the sermon about what it would look like in the chaos that would ensue if somebody really did yank that thing off the wall, whether they smashed it on the altar or not. And the same words came back to me. But it was just too weird to think that those words could have any place in this sermon. So I thought about just junking the whole sermon and writing something else, something that might be easier. I even thought about just, since the first lesson was on the Ten Commandments, we could look in the back of the Catechism and read what they say about the Ten Commandments and be done with it. And since I didn't have any thoughts at all other than that, I thought, well, I guess that is what I'm going to do, until all of a sudden the story of Jonah came to mind. Now, the story of Jonah is one of those stories in the Old Testament found in the book of Jonah. It's a story that tells about a prophet named Jonah who refuses to carry the message that God gave him to the people of Nineveh. And it occurred to me for a moment that I might be acting a little bit like Jonah in throwing a little tantrum about not knowing how to finish my sermon, and so not wanting to carry the message at all. And about that time, it also came to me that this ridiculous line I kept remembering is the last sentence in the book of Jonah. So I decided that as ridiculous as it sounds, the line that kept coming back to me that day and earlier in the week must be a line that needs to be spoken today for one reason or another. So here goes. When I asked the question of God, God, what do you behold when you behold your church? The words from the book of Jonah that came to mind were these. More than 120,000 persons who do not know their right hand from their left. That when God beholds his church, he beholds more than whatever that number was. I don't think the number was important. More than 120,000 people who do not know their right hand from their left. And maybe these words aren't as ridiculous as they sound, or as they sounded to me. Because in the book of Jonah, they're not spoken with condemnation. They're spoken with great compassion. They're spoken with great compassion about a people who know that they need the compassion of God. About a people who know that they need the compassion of each other. So perhaps the Lord of love beholds the church as just a bunch of us who we don't know our left hand from our right, but are willing to admit it. Are willing to say, I don't have all the answers. I don't have something I can sell you that's going to be guaranteed to make your life better, make you a better person, or be exactly what you need. And maybe as a church, once we step out of marketing mentalities, we are willing to say, you know, that's not a product anybody can really sell. And maybe we're at our best when we know that we're all in it together, making this pilgrim journey, whether it's the pilgrim journey of Lent or of any season of the year, making it asking God to behold us just as we are, to have compassion on us, and to open us to the compassion that God would breathe into our lives and through us would breathe